The passage that we're going to consider for Mother's Day will be 2 Timothy 1, 3 and following. I thank God, as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers night and day when I call to remembrance your genuine faith, the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you. In this passage, people often look and they say, well, isn't it nice that Paul happened to remember Timothy's grandmother and mother? And they made special mention. Well, what do you know about his grandmother and his mother? This is the only place in the whole scripture where they're named. In Acts chapter 16, verse 1, it says that Timothy's mother was a believing Jewish woman, but then it goes on to say, but his father was a Greek. Doesn't sound like the father was much to write home about, does it? This is all that we know from actual statements directly mentioning these two women. But I am here to say that there's an untold story. All we have to do is look a little more closely and we will see. The place where Timothy grew up was either in Lystra or Derbe. The way that it's written in the text, it's not quite clear whether he's from Lystra or whether he's from Derbe. But that's where Timothy grew up. This is where his grandmother and his mother both lived. And Paul came through on a missionary journey, and he met this young man, but before that he had obviously met the grandmother and the mother, because notice how he says it. He unceasingly thanks God when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, Timothy, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. What we find out is that both his grandmother and his mother became believers before he did. But let's look a little more closely at where it is that this is. This is actually ground zero for the Galatian controversy. I hold to the Southern Galatian theory. We won't go into an explanation of that. We'd be here a little while. You may remember that the book of Galatians is written against a heresy where people were saying that in order for a Gentile to receive everlasting life, it was necessary for them to keep the law and to be circumcised. Certainly doesn't sound like a gift of everlasting life. This was a church that very quickly, or actually churches, because Paul writes to the churches, plural, of Galatia, which would include Lystra, Derbe, and some of the other towns that Paul went and planted churches in. But what do we know? Timothy held fast on the faith, and so did Lois, and so did Eunice. And this was a place that was ripe for heresy. We'll notice that there are actually 4 types of people. If you were to read in Acts chapter 16, 4 types of people are mentioned. There are Jews, there are proselytes, there are God-fearers, and there are Gentiles. It's very easy for us to understand what a Jewish person is. Someone whose ancestors include Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What is a proselyte? Well, if it's a man, a proselyte would be someone who has converted to Judaism and who underwent adult circumcision. A God-fearer was a person who was a Gentile and found Judaism very attractive, but said, I don't think I want to visit a doctor. And then the 4th type of people would be Gentiles. There was a very interesting synagogue that Paul was ministering in, and in this synagogue they were welcoming Jews, proselytes, and God-fearers. The God-fearers obviously would not be welcomed into membership. But out of this group, Paul spoke and he presented the grace message, and there were many people who became believers, and then furthermore there was an outreach to Gentiles who had no interest in the synagogue. But it's very easy to see how the churches in this region could become entangled within a concept of legalism. So what do we see? When we look at Lois and Eunice, I see people who stood up for the faith, had a clear statement of that to Timothy, and probably were the ones that caused him to find out that Jesus Christ gives the free gift of everlasting life. Doesn't look like there was necessarily any encouragement from the father. It is the grandmother and the mother who were responsible at the human level for Timothy becoming the man that God is able to use and that we find on the pages of Scripture. And besides that, despite all of the opposition that developed to a grace message that everlasting life is a gift, not a good deal, but a gift to those who simply believe Jesus for his promise of everlasting life, Lois and Eunice held firm. I would say they should give great encouragement to all the mothers and all the grandmothers and all the teachers and aunts to be able to present the message of life to children. Look at how God was able to use the ministry of Lois and Eunice.